Now that we're back inside of Server Manager, let's take a look at some of the things we can do with some of the new storage technologies. So in this case, I'm still sitting on server 1. So what I'll be demonstrating here is that I'm able to perform all of these tasks remotely against server O2. So in this case, we've got some new storage in server O2 that I need to configure. And what I want to do is go through and start taking advantage of some of the capabilities of storage spaces. So let's take a look at server 2 to begin with, so we can take a look at the disks. So we can see that server O1 has got a few disks. When I take a look at server 2, it's got a few disks in there, but it really doesn't have too much configured in terms of volumes. It's just got some of the basic partitions that are set up during the installation and a small C drive. So what I need to do now is go through and start setting this up so that it works with some of the other disks and storage that we've actually got available inside of the server. So let's go through and start configuring some of this. So the first thing that I want to do over here is, if I just refresh this to see if server 2 appears in here. Okay, and what we see here is that when I did the refresh, because Server 2 has just come online, what I can do here is I can select Primordial, and you'll see here that it's managed by Server 2 and available to Server 2, and Server 2 is the read-write server. So this starts giving you an indication of the way that it does work across a network. So what I can do now is, from the tasks, I can create a new storage pool. And first of all, for the pool, I'll just call it OEM Storage Pool. And I'll choose all of the disks that I want to make available as part of that pool. And what it's effectively doing here is looking for any unused storage across all of the disks that I've got in the system. And you can see here that it's able to differentiate between what drives are traditional mechanical hard drives versus which ones are flash-based SSDs. Now what I could start doing in here is if I wanted to start putting in some hot spare drives, or if I wanted to have a backup or a spare drive sitting in here but choose when to manually drop that in. These are some of the kinds of things that I can do through this interface just as I'm configuring it. But if I want to make changes later, I can do it through the interface, or I could go through and do this and a lot more through PowerShell if I'm that way inclined. Now we can just take a look and say it's not clustered. It's the storage spaces subsystem, and it's going to be able to create, based on the amount of storage available across those 4 drives, 2.24 terabytes of storage. So let's go through now and run through this. And before I click on close, what I'll do is choose to configure a virtual disk, because all we've really done so far is pull all of the disks together into a single storage pool. So effectively we're saying here is the total amount of storage across all of the disks that we can work with. So now we're working inside of the new virtual disk wizard. So what we're doing here is, as it says in the top line here, is the wizard helps you create a virtual disk from the storage pool. So we could create one storage disk that takes advantage of as much storage as possible, or we can create multiple virtual disks, which is what I'll actually do as we go through this wizard several times. So in this case, I want to create it on server O2, and I'll call it vdisk1. And what you'll see here is that it's giving me the option to create storage tiers. So what storage tiers do is enable me to start taking advantage of the higher speed drives that we've got with the SSDs, so that information that's accessed more regularly or information that I choose to pin can actually be placed directly on those faster drives, so that for a lot of people using it at the same time, or it may be when we've got parts of a database that need to be accessed, for example. These are things that can actually automatically be moved into that environment without any interaction on your side. So I'll choose that option, and then we can go next. We've got a few options here when it comes to the layout. We can do simple, we can do mirror, and if I had more drives than what I've got here, we could go through and start setting up different types of approaches to parity, the same way that we would in RAID. But where this is really starting to differentiate itself from what we think of as just what a RAID controller would normally do, is that all of a sudden this is just a small subset of what Storage Spaces provides overall. And as we go through the rest of this demonstration, you'll see more of this. So next up for provisioning, I can't choose thin provisioning here. I will be able to choose that later in this demonstration. And the reason why I can't choose thin provisioning is because storage tiers requires fixed provisioning. So let's just choose fixed for now, and we'll revisit thin in a few moments. Now for the size, I want that faster tier to be as big as possible, but I don't actually want this standard tier to be consuming all of that disk space. So instead of that 1860, instead I'll just say, actually let's just choose 1 TB instead. That works. So that means that we've got 1.38 terabytes of tiered space. Now another thing down here that's important is that it tells me that the virtual disk might take additional space to create a write-back cache. So this means that for, large bursts of activity that would normally be quite stressful on a mechanical disk system. In this case, when we've got that SSD tier, it means it can effectively handle some of those peak workloads quite quickly without impacting overall performance, and then just write them back through to the mechanical drives as needed. And this is, again, just something that it will do automatically for you. You don't need to really tell it how to approach that. So I'll just click on Create, and we'll let that run through, and within a short time period it will then say, do we want to create a volume? And in this case we do want to create a volume. So what we've done now is, if you think about it, we've aggregated all of the disks into that storage pool, then we've created a virtual disk on top of that. Now with that virtual disk, it's like when we've got a physical disk where we actually need to go through and either create new volumes or new partitions on that. So in this case I'll go through and I'll create a new volume / partition, which is effectively the entire size of that tiered storage space that I just created. So 1.38 terabytes, it will be assigned the D drive. I'll give it the name D drive just to be consistent. And now other things that we can start doing here is, because I've enabled the data deduplication role, I can set this up so that data deduplication can actually run. And this gives us very, very effective file compression, data deduplication type capabilities, and really starts giving us the ability to start storing a lot more information on a particular storage infrastructure. So for now, I'll just choose general purpose file server and tell it to deduplicate files that are older than 3 days old. If there are custom files that I want to remove from that, I can do that. Now, if we take a look at the deduplication schedule, you can see I've already got a couple of options set up in here. So, I don't necessarily want background optimization run during the day. It might be a server where I really need to do some some measurement at first to actually make sure that it's performing properly before I put too much of a workload on it. Now you can also see that I've got two schedules where I can create one for a throughput optimization at the top, and for this one I've effectively said, look, from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. During the week, just run and do the optimization that's required. But then I've created a second one so that on weekends it can come through and, if it does need more time, it can basically run all day Saturday, all day Sunday. And, realistically, if it's something that we're talking about in an SMB environment, it's probably not something that's going to need to run all the time, but it's good to have these schedules set up just in case it does. So with that, I can now click Finish, and that will go through and it will create that. And what we can do now is we can go back to that storage pool, and we can see what's been created there. So we can see that we've got vdisk1. It's simple, but if we jump up now and take a look in disks, this is where we can see that vdisk1 appears here. I'll just scroll up a little bit so you can see. So it appears as that physical, or as a representation of a physical disk as we'd expect it to be, and then we've got that volume underneath that. So if I go back to the storage pool, we actually have left some space on those drives. So what else can we do with them? So I can now create a new virtual disk on that pool where we can start working with some of the additional storage that we've got left. So again, we'll choose storage pool. It remembers where we were. And we'll call this one vdisk2. And again, we can create a storage tier, because I do actually have another partition there that wasn't picked up the first time because it had to use similar sizes across all of the disks. So there was actually some space that's still available. So in this case, I want to take advantage of that space. Again, we'll create a simple mirror and we'll choose fixed. And I'll specify the maximum size there, but I won't choose the maximum size again in this standard tier. Instead, I'll just say 500 gig is enough. And we go through, and it's pretty much that same process we saw before, where we need to go through. We've created that virtual disk, what we now need to do is create that partition or that volume on that. So let's do that quickly. We'll let it take the maximum size, drive letter E, so we'll just accept defaults for most of these things. And let's put it to general purpose file server again. And everything there looks good, so I'll hit create and we are good to go. So now we can see that we've got vdisk1, we've got vdisk2. If I jump back up to disks, you'll see that we've got drive D and we've got drive E. So we've still got that small amount of space left on the drive, so let's go through and create another virtual disk. This time around though, we'll choose something different. We'll call it vdisk3. And in this case, we don't want to create storage tiers. So as soon as we don't create storage tiers, we start getting a few other options. So in this case, we can start looking at things like simple mirror, and we've also got parity appearing in here as well. But I'll choose simple. And this is what I really want to highlight here is that now that I've chosen the simple option, sorry, I've chosen a non-tiered disk, I can actually choose thin provisioning as an option. So when you think about features like thin provisioning or SSD tiering, these are normally capabilities that you have to step up to some kind of SAN device for. But in this case, we're actually working with them directly on top of Windows Server 2012 and or specifically 2012 R2, which is exposing this functionality. Now for the size, you'll notice here that I can't specify a maximum size. I can actually, because I'm saying that I want this to be thin provisioned, the size of the store or the amount of storage that I'm making available here doesn't have to correlate to the amount of storage that actually is available. So in this case, I could go through and, even though we've only got, I think, about 300 gig or so left, I could say, let's make this a 16 terabyte virtual disk. And the idea here is that what we can do is, as we start getting closer and closer to actually filling the amount of storage we do have available, we can add additional disks in here and start expanding out into those. So if I click create, okay, now we'll create that volume. So again, most of this is just going next, next, next. We'll see that the maximum volume size is 16 terabytes. We'll give it drive letter F. We'll make it volume label F drive. Again, we'll enable data deduplication as a general purpose file server. We've already seen the duplication schedule details. We don't need to see those again. And now I'll just click create. So now that's running, and that will take a couple more seconds. And effectively what we'll have done then is gone through and configured that drive or that server so that now that it has multiple drives set up, we've created those all out of that same storage pool. We've got some of them are tiered, some of them have non-tiered, or one of them isn't tiered. And if we need to make adjustments to them, so if we go in and we take a look at vdisk1, for example, I might decide that I actually may want to store some running virtual machines there. So if we take a look at the properties for that, okay, what I will need to do is I'll need to go through and start making a few changes there. So when it comes to the data deduplication, so if we go to disks, and I want that 1.3 terabyte drive, here you can see I can configure data deduplication. So instead of it being a general purpose file server, I actually want it to be a VDI server. So this is where I'm going to be storing a few desktop VM images. So all of a sudden it means that it's got a different list of file types that it's going to exclude from that compression process. So if you take a look at those, they're effectively extensions of files that are going to be used while you are using VHDs that you don't want the deduplication service running and trying to work on those while they're actually online. So in this case, the VDI server is a better bet for you. So I'll just hit apply and OK, and then we're good to go. So probably the only other thing that I want to show you while we are in here is if I come back to server 1, which is the server that I'm currently on, what I want to show you here is that if we take a look at this, you'll see that I do have data deduplication enabled here, and there are VMs running. And what you'll see though is that I've actually got a 70% data deduplication rate. So this is with a handful of virtual machines. It's already telling me that I've got 326 gigabytes of data saved there. So it doesn't take too long for those savings to really start adding up when you do enable that data deduplication capability. Now, one of the things that comes up when storage spaces is discussed is, can I just take if I'm having hardware issues with a server, can I pull the disks out, put them in another server, and have those storage spaces become available? And the answer to that is definitely yes. So with that, we'll leave it for now, and we'll come back and go through some more of Server Manager and other Windows Server 2012 R2 features in some other short, sharp videos for you.